"Grandpa, they're starving," my granddaughter whispered. And my coffee cup froze halfway to my mouth. Behind me sat the wife I had mourned for 5 years. A woman our whole family believed drowned in a boating accident. Now watching the door like a hunted animal. "Don't tell our son," she begged, her voice breaking. "He's the one who arranged the accident. He's the one who buried me." I quietly reached for my phone under the table, not to call our son, but to call the one man who could prove she was telling the truth. But let me start from the beginning. I'm grateful you're here with me. Before we begin, I want to ask, have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? Leave a comment and let me know. I read every one. Just a heads up, some details here are fictionalized for storytelling, but the core message, that's what I hope stays with you. The whisper came while I was cutting Ivy's pancakes. 3 words that would collapse 40 years of certainty. "Grandpa, why do those people only have water?" I looked up from the plate. Syrup sticky knife paused mid-motion. Saturday mornings at the Harborview restaurant on Penn's Landing had become our ritual over the past year. Ever since my wife passed and my 9-year-old granddaughter, Ivy decided I needed regular human interaction. As she put it with the gravity only a child blessed with her late grandmother's gift for noticing things could manage. Same corner booth by the window. Same view of the marina where I'd built my first resort 43 years ago. Same easy conversation about school and boats and whether pancakes counted as a complete breakfast. Linda, the weekend server who'd known my order for 3 years, had just refilled my coffee. The restaurant hummed with its usual Saturday morning energy. Families, couples, the comfortable chaos of people with nowhere urgent to be. "Which people, sweetheart?" I asked, following her gaze toward the back corner. "The lady and the boy. They've been sitting there since before we came in." Ivy's fork hovered over her blueberries, her expression troubled in that particular way children get when they've noticed something adults have trained themselves to ignore. "The lady keeps looking at the door. They look hungry." She was right. At 69, after building a $450 million empire of coastal resorts and marina developments across 3 states, I'd spent 40 years operating on one principle. Foundations either hold or they don't. There is no middle ground. No amount of wishful thinking turns sand into bedrock. Ivy had inherited that same unflinching ability to see what was actually there, not what should be there. I turned to look at the table she'd indicated. A woman sat in the corner booth with a boy of maybe 10. Both had water glasses, untouched. No menus, no plates. The woman wore a faded denim jacket despite the June warmth, and her dark hair was cut short and practical. Her face was gaunt, cheekbones too sharp, skin too pale. The boy beside her had the same hollow look, thin wrists, serious eyes. The kind of careful stillness that comes from practice. "Maybe they're waiting for someone," I offered. But even as I said it, something nagged at the edge of my vision, something about the woman's profile. "They've been here almost 20 minutes, Ivy insisted. "Linda walked by twice and they said they were fine. But Grandpa, you can see they're not fine." The woman shifted in her seat, angling slightly toward the window. And that's when the world tilted sideways. I knew that face. My fork slipped from my hand. The clatter against the plate rang through the restaurant like a gunshot in my ears, though no one else seemed to notice. It wasn't possible. Simone, my daughter-in-law, 58 years old. Though she looked 70 in that moment, worn thin by something I couldn't name. Her once polished appearance reduced to faded clothes and desperate eyes. The woman who'd been the CFO of my son's division, who'd managed our quarterly reports with precision and grace, who'd sailed with us every summer. The woman who'd died 5 years ago when her yacht capsized during a storm off Cape May. They'd found her life jacket. Searched for 3 days. The Coast Guard report concluded accidental drowning, equipment failure in heavy weather. We'd held a memorial. My son Cedric had barely spoken for 6 months. Their son, I looked at the boy again. Finn. That was Finn, 5 years older, impossibly thin, but unmistakably my grandson. The dark, serious eyes, the way he held himself perfectly still, watching everything. Grandpa? Ivy's voice seemed to come from very far away. Do you know them? I couldn't answer, couldn't breathe. My mind spun through impossible calculations, death certificates, insurance settlements, 5 years of grief. 5 years of watching Cedric try to rebuild his life. 5 years of believing the ocean had taken her, as if sensing my stare. Simone looked up. Our eyes met across 12 feet of restaurant floor. All color drained from her face in the span of a heartbeat. Not surprise, not relief, not joy at being recognized. Terror. Raw, absolute, bone-deep terror. Her hand shot out and gripped Finn's wrist so hard the boy flinched. Her lips formed a single word I couldn't hear but could read clearly. No. Finn went completely still beside her, his small hands flattening against the table in the practiced stillness of a child who'd learned not to draw attention. He looked at his mother, then followed her gaze to me, and something flickered across his face. Recognition? Maybe. Or the memory of recognition from a lifetime ago, when he was 5 years old and his mother wasn't dead. Simone, I said, or tried to say. The word caught in my throat. She shook her head, almost imperceptibly. Her eyes wide, desperate, pleading, locked onto mine with an intensity that spoke louder than any scream. Don't. Please don't. But don't what? Don't approach, don't speak, don't tell someone she was alive. Don't shatter the careful lie she'd apparently built over 5 years of hiding, 5 years of grief, 5 years of believing she was gone. All of it a lie. Or worse, something I didn't yet understand. Grandpa, what's wrong? Ivy's small hand touched my arm. You're scaring me. I stood without meaning to, my chair scraping against the floor. Simone's face went from pale to ashen. Her hand trembled as it gripped Finn's wrist, and her eyes held mine with that terrible, silent plea. The restaurant noise faded to white static. Linda approached with the coffee pot, smiling, oblivious. Ivy was saying something. Simone was shaking her head, standing now, pulling Finn up with her, backing toward the side exit. My dead daughter-in-law was alive, terrified, running, and I still didn't know why. I crossed the restaurant floor in 4 strides, dimly aware of Ivy calling my name behind me. Simone flinched as I approached, half rising from her seat, her hand still gripping Finn's wrist so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Simone, I said quietly, stopping at the edge of her table. Everyone said they held a memorial. Her free hand shot out and caught mine. The contact was electric with desperation, this woman I'd known for 20 years, who'd managed quarterly reports with steady precision, who'd never shown fear at corporate presentations or difficult board meetings, was shaking like a leaf. Please, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Please don't tell Cedric I'm alive. Don't tell him you saw us here. The words hit me like cold water. Not, thank God you found me, not, we need help, not even where have you been? Just that terrible, impossible plea. Cedric, I repeated, the name feeling strange in my mouth. Why would I? What are you talking about? Finn sat perfectly still beside her, his dark eyes fixed on me with an unsettling intensity for a 10-year-old. He didn't interrupt, didn't fidget, didn't do any of the things children normally do. He just watched, as if he'd heard this conversation before and was waiting to see how it would end. He can't know, Simone said, and her grip on my hand tightened. Russell, please, if he finds out we're alive. Alive? I interrupted, the word catching in my throat. Simone, we've spent 5 years believing you drowned. Cedric barely spoke for 6 months. We searched for 3 days. The Coast Guard report said, the boat accident wasn't an accident. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper, and she glanced around the restaurant as if expecting someone to materialize from the breakfast crowd. He's the one who did this. Your son. He tried to kill me. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. 40 years building coastal resorts had taught me to spot structural flaws, weaknesses in foundations, cracks in load-bearing walls, the subtle signs that something would fail under pressure. But I'd never thought to look for cracks in my own son. That's not possible, I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I could hear how hollow they sounded. Cedric couldn't. He thought I was dead. Simone continued, her eyes never leaving mine. We've been hiding for 5 years because of him. Moving every few months. Different cities, different names. Finn hasn't been to the same school for more than 8 months since he was 5 years old. I looked at the boy again. Really looked at him. The careful stillness, the way he watched the room's exits. The practiced neutrality with which he'd stared at Ivy's uneaten pancakes. A child who'd learned not to want because wanting was dangerous. Why? The question came out rougher than I intended. Why would he? Because I found out what he was doing, Simone said. Because I was going to expose him. Cedric, his son's name, spoken like a curse. Behind me. I heard Linda approach and then retreat, sensing the tension at the table. Ivy was watching from our booth, her small face creased with worry. The restaurant continued its cheerful Saturday morning rhythm, oblivious to the fact that my entire understanding of the past 5 years was dissolving like sugar in water. I don't understand, I said, though part of me was starting to. In the way you understand a building is about to collapse in the seconds before it actually does. I know, Simone said softly. I know this sounds impossible, but Russell, I need you to believe me. Or if you can't believe me yet, I need you not to tell him we're here. Just for now. Just until... She stopped, seeming to realize she had no end to that sentence. Finn shifted slightly in his seat, and I noticed his eyes had drifted toward our booth again. Toward the stack of pancakes Ivy had abandoned. The look lasted only a second before he forced his gaze back to neutral. But I'd seen it. The hunger. The discipline required to suppress it. I raised my hand and caught Linda's attention. She hurried over, her professional smile firmly in place. 2 full breakfasts, I said, keeping my voice steady. Whatever they want. And coffee. Russell Simone started. You're going to eat, I said, in the same tone I'd used to close business deals for 40 years. Both of you. Then you're going to tell me what happened. Linda nodded and disappeared. I turned to where Ivy sat watching her untouched pancakes growing cold. Sweetheart, I called across the restaurant. Take your plate to the counter and ask Linda for some chocolate milk. Grandpa needs a few minutes. Ivy's eyes widened, but she nodded. She was a smart child, smart enough to know when adults needed privacy, even if she didn't understand why. I pulled out a chair and sat down across from Simone and Finn, my mind racing through 5 years of memories, looking for cracks I'd missed. Cedric at the memorial, hollow-eyed and silent. Cedric slowly rebuilding his life. Cedric managing the business with the same steady competence he'd always shown. Cedric, who, according to the woman sitting across from me, had tried to murder his wife and make it look like an accident. Tell me, I said, my voice low and strained. I need you to tell me everything, from the beginning. Simone stared at me for a long moment, as if weighing whether to trust me. Finn's hand found hers under the table, a gesture of support that seemed too old for his years. Linda returned with coffee and set the cup in front of Simone. She wrapped both hands around it as if drawing warmth from the ceramic, and stared into the dark surface. When she looked up, her eyes held 5 years of running, 5 years of fear, 5 years of a truth I wasn't ready to hear. It started 6 years ago, she said quietly. When I found the discrepancies in the pension fund. The words came slowly at first, like a dam with hairline cracks finally giving way after 5 years of pressure. I was good at my job, Russell, Simone said, wrapping both hands around the coffee cup Linda had set down. You knew that. I paid attention to numbers the way you paid attention to foundations. I nodded. She had been good, meticulous, thorough, the kind of CFO who caught errors before they became problems. When Cedric had brought her into the business 15 years ago, I'd been relieved to have someone managing the financial side who actually understood what the numbers meant. 6 years ago, I started noticing patterns, she continued. Marina equipment invoices running 40% above historical norms. Boat maintenance contracts with vendors I'd never heard of. Consulting fees for deliverables that never materialized. Finn sat beside her, methodically working through the pancakes Linda had brought. He ate with the focused efficiency of someone who'd learned not to waste food, not to assume there would be more later. The sight made something tighten in my chest. At first, I thought it was sloppy bookkeeping, Simone said. Market fluctuation, vendor price increases, the kind of thing you see in any business. But then I started tracking them, creating spreadsheets, pulling historical data, comparing year-over-year trends. And, I prompted when she paused, it was too consistent to be sloppy. She took a sip of coffee, grimacing slightly as if it had gone bitter. The amounts stayed just below the thresholds that would trigger automatic audits. The timing clustered around quarterly review periods when oversight was lightest. Someone knew our systems. Russell. Someone knew exactly how to stay invisible. How do you tell a father his son has been stealing from the people who built his empire? The dock workers, the maintenance crews, the kitchen staff who'd given 40 years to a company they believed would take care of them. Simone had known that question 6 years ago. I could see it in the way she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Even now. I traced the payments, she said. Shell companies registered in Delaware that didn't exist on paper 6 months before the first invoice. Bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. Money moving through so many layers it should have been impossible to follow. But you followed it, I said. I followed it. She set down the coffee cup, and her hands were shaking. Every fraudulent invoice had been approved by someone in Cedric's department. Some of them... She stopped, swallowed. Some of them had been approved by Cedric himself. The restaurant noise seemed very far away. I was aware of Ivy at the counter, swinging her legs and sipping chocolate milk, oblivious to the fact that her world was about to change in ways she couldn't imagine. I was aware of the morning sunlight streaming through the windows, the smell of coffee and maple syrup, the ordinary Saturday morning continuing around us while Simone told me my son was a thief. How much? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. $3.8 million. She said it flatly, without emphasis. From the employee pension fund. Over the past several years, and it's still happening. My coffee cup stopped halfway to my mouth. 3.8 million. Not operational funds, not profit margins. The pension fund. The money that was supposed to take care of the people who'd helped build this business from nothing. The retirement accounts of workers who'd trusted us to protect their future. I kept detailed records, Simone continued. Screenshots of transactions, copies of invoices, the whole paper trail. I was planning to bring it to you, to show you everything, and let you decide how to handle it. Why didn't you? The question came out harsher than I intended. Because I made a mistake, she said quietly. I didn't just find the money, Russell. I also went to a lawyer. I stared at her. A lawyer. About changing the succession, the inheritance structure. She looked at Finn, who had gone very still beside her, his fork suspended over his plate. I wanted Finn protected. Not through Cedric directly, with professional oversight. Trust structures that Cedric couldn't touch. The pieces started clicking into place with the awful precision of a building collapsing exactly as the structural engineer predicted it would. You were cutting him out, I said. I was protecting a 5-year-old boy from his own father. Simone corrected, and there was steel in her voice now. From a man who was stealing from people's retirement accounts. From someone I no longer trusted with anything that mattered. She'd tried to protect a 5-year-old boy from his own father, and nearly died for it. When did he find out? I asked. I don't know exactly when he realized I was tracking the money, Simone said. But the lawyer I consulted, she stopped, her jaw tightening. Lawyers talk. Professional courtesy between firms, that kind of thing. Cedric's personal attorney was in the same legal network. I didn't know that until later. So he knew, I said. He knew you'd found the theft, and he knew you were changing the inheritance. Simone nodded slowly. The theft alone maybe we could have handled quietly. Restitution, removal from the business, some kind of agreement. But cutting him out of the inheritance... She looked at me directly for the first time since she'd started talking. That was hundreds of millions of dollars he thought he was entitled to. That was his future, his legacy. Everything he believed was his by right. I understood what she was saying. The pension fund theft was about desperation or greed or whatever had driven Cedric to start stealing. But the inheritance that was about his entire life plan. That was about what he thought he deserved. That was about power. When he found out about both the audit trail I was building and the inheritance change I was pursuing, Simone's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. A week later, he invited me sailing. My hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. The boat. The storm. The accident that the Coast Guard had ruled equipment failure. The accident that wasn't an accident. The worst part, Simone said, wasn't the threat itself. It was how calmly he delivered it. He came to the house 1 week before the boat trip, she continued, her voice taking on the flat quality of someone reciting facts to keep emotion at bay. May of 2020. It was a Thursday evening. He walked into our kitchen like he'd stopped by for coffee. I could picture it. Cedric had always been good at appearing casual when he was anything but. A skill I'd admired once, thinking it showed composure under pressure. He said he'd heard I'd been asking questions about pension accounting. Simone's hands tightened around her coffee cup. That it was complicated territory, danger even, to make accusations without understanding all the context. Dangerous, I repeated. Then he smiled, Simone said, and something in her voice made my skin crawl. He smiled and said, accidents happen on the water. Simone, boats, docks, marina equipment. You should be more careful. The restaurant suddenly felt too warm, too bright, too normal for the words I was hearing. That was all, she continued. He patted my shoulder like he was giving me helpful advice. Then he left, drove away. I stood in my kitchen for 20 minutes before I could move. How do you process the moment you realize your son, the man you watched grow up, whose son you love is calmly telling you he's going to kill his wife? Simone had lived that moment, was living it again now, 5 years later, as she told me. I knew immediately he wasn't bluffing. She said, I'd worked with Cedric for years. I knew when he was posturing and when he was serious. This was serious. You should have come to me, I said. Though even as the words left my mouth, I understood why she hadn't. What would I have done? Believed my daughter-in-law over my son, based on veiled threats and financial irregularities? I wanted to believe I would have. But the man sitting in this restaurant 5 years later wasn't sure. I had maybe 72 hours, Simone said. That's what my gut told me. 3 days before he made whatever move he was planning. 72 hours. My chest constricted. She'd known her own execution date. So I worked, she continued. Late nights at the office, after everyone else had gone home. I copied everything. Every file. Every email. Every bank record I could access. The vendor invoices. The shell company registrations. The offshore account transfers all of it onto a small external hard drive. Where did you... I started. Hide it. She gave a bitter laugh. That was the problem. I couldn't just leave it in my desk. If something happened to me, Cedric would have access to the office within hours. He'd destroy any evidence before you even knew to look for it. Finn had finished his pancakes and was sitting very still again, hands folded on the table. He'd heard this story before, I realized. A 5-year-old boy had lived through the terror his mother was describing. Even if he hadn't understood it at the time, I needed somewhere he'd never think to look, Simone said. Somewhere the evidence could survive even if I didn't. She paused, took a breath. I bought a wooden boat model from a craft shop downtown. Beautiful thing, hand-carved, maybe 8 inches long. The kind people put on shelves for decoration. I felt something shift in my chest as she spoke. I carved out a hollow compartment in the base, she continued, just big enough for the hard drive. Fitted it inside, sealed it with wood glue, and touched up the finish so you couldn't tell it had been modified. Then I gave it to Finn. She looked at her son, and her voice softened. I told him it was an early birthday gift. The Grandpa Russell had built boats his whole life, and now Finn had one of his own to keep. I loved it, Finn said quietly. It was the first time he'd spoken since the food arrived, and his voice was small but steady. Mom said to keep it safe, that it was special. Cedric saw it on your shelf, Simone said to Finn, though she was still looking at me. He smiled. Just a toy. Just a 5-year-old's keepsake from his step-grandmother. He never looked twice. She'd given a 5-year-old boy a toy boat, knowing it might be the last thing she ever gave him. A goodbye disguised as a gift. The evidence has been with Finn this whole time, I asked. Simone nodded. Through 14 moves, 5 years, 4 different states. He carried it in his backpack when we left Philadelphia that first night, and he's kept it safe ever since. The wooden boat. A child's treasure. A dead woman's testimony. I thought about the careful planning that required. The presence of mind to hide evidence while racing against a ticking clock, while knowing her son was planning to kill her. The cold calculation it took to turn a gift into a time capsule. I didn't know if I'd survive what was coming, Simone said quietly. But I knew the truth would. One way or another, even if it took years, someone would find that boat. Won it. See what Cedric had done. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup again, though it had long since gone cold. 3 days later, Cedric called, she said. He wanted to take me sailing, just the 2 of us, he said, a chance to clear the air about the questions I'd been asking, about the tension between us. Her eyes met mine, and they were absolutely flat. I knew what it was, she said. I knew he was going to try to kill me. And I went anyway, because refusing would have told him I knew, would have made him suspicious, would have put Finn in danger. She paused. So I kissed my son goodbye, told him I'd be back by morning, and got in the car with the man I knew was planning my murder. The water was colder than she'd expected when she hit it, cold enough to steal her breath, black enough to swallow any scream. Simone's voice had gone quiet, almost clinical as she described it. The way people talk about trauma when the only way through is to drain it of feeling. It was June, she said. Early evening. The yacht was beautiful, one of the company boats. 42 feet, pristine condition. Cedric talked about the business while we motored out, how we could work things out, how I'd misunderstood his intentions. I could picture the scene too clearly. The golden hour light on the water off Cape May, the gentle rock of a well-maintained vessel. My son, speaking reasonably, playing the part of the misunderstood party. He was so calm, Simone continued. That's what I remember most. Not angry, not defensive, just calm, like we were discussing quarterly projections. She'd gone onto that boat knowing it was a trap. I understood that now. Refusing would have confirmed her suspicions. forced Cedric to improvise something messier. Accepting gave her control over the timing, let her mentally prepare for whatever he'd planned, though I doubted she'd prepared for what actually came. We were about 2 miles out when he asked me to check a line near the stern, she said. "Check that line for me, would you?" That's all he said, so casual. I leaned over the rail, and the safety cable just gave way. Her hands demonstrated the motion, reaching, leaning, then the sudden backward fall. "Not frayed," she said. I saw it as I went over, clean cut, surgical, like someone had measured exactly how much tension it would take before it snapped. I had built resort foundations to withstand hurricanes, but nothing in 40 years had prepared me for the structural failure of believing my own son was capable of this. I hit the water, Simone continued, went under, surfaced, gasping. I could see the yacht maybe 50 feet away. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was even flatter. I heard the engine rev. He wasn't circling back. He leaving. The engine sounds faded. He wasn't circling back. "June water off the New Jersey coast," she said. "Maybe 62 degrees. I couldn't feel my legs after the first hour, but I swam anyway." Rage kept me warm when my body wanted to quit. Rage and the thought of Finn waking up to find out his mother had drowned. Finn sat perfectly still beside her, staring at his empty plate. He'd heard this story before, I realized. Maybe not all the details, but enough to understand what his father had done. "I swam for the lights on shore," Simone said. "Lost track of time, 3 hours, maybe, could have been 4. My arms stopped working properly around the second hour, but I kept kicking. Finally, I felt sand under my feet." She described crawling onto a beach south of Cape May Point, alone and freezing, while somewhere above the waterline Cedric was probably already making phone calls, reporting his wife missing, playing the concerned husband. "I knew what he'd be telling everyone," she said. "That I'd been standing too close to the rail, that I'd lost my balance, that he'd circled back but couldn't find me, that the Coast Guard was searching." Her voice held a bitter edge now. "I knew if I went back, if I walked into a police station soaking wet, saying my husband tried to kill me, I'd be fighting a man who owned every narrative, who had the company lawyers, the family reputation, the grief-stricken widower story already in motion." I started to interrupt, but she wasn't finished. "So I made a choice," she said. "I hitchhiked. Some trucker picked me up, asked if I was okay. I said I'd been swimming and lost track of time. He dropped me 3 blocks from our house around dawn." She described waking 5-year-old Finn in the gray morning light, grabbing the wooden boat model from his shelf, stuffing clothes into a backpack, walking out the door before Cedric's tearful phone call would arrive announcing her tragic death. "Finn asked me why we were leaving," she said, and her voice finally cracked. "I told him we were going on an adventure." She'd woken a 5-year-old in the dark and called it an adventure, because telling him the truth that his father had just tried to kill her was a sentence no child should hear. "That was 5 years ago," Simone said. 14 cities, Portland, Tucson, Memphis, places where we didn't exist on paper, where cash and fake names and constant vigilance kept us invisible. I thought about the packed backpack Simone had mentioned earlier. 5 years of teaching a child to be ready to run at any moment. "We never stayed longer than 8 months," she continued. "Every time Finn started to settle, every time someone asked too many questions about his school records or my employment history, we moved. Because I knew what would happen if Cedric discovered I was alive." She met my eyes across the table. "He'd already decided I was dead," she said. "The memorial service, the insurance settlement, the grieving father narrative, all of it was built on that foundation. If I surfaced, I wasn't just a threat to his freedom. I was proof that everything he'd told everyone for 5 years was a lie." I understood then. Staying dead wasn't cowardice, it was strategy. Flight Cedric in court meant fighting with resources he controlled, narratives he'd already established, sympathies he'd already earned. Disappearing was the only move that let her survive. And this morning, Simone said quietly, I walked into a restaurant for a glass of water, because we'd been sleeping in my car for 2 days, and Finn was so hungry he wasn't complaining anymore. Her voice broke on the last words. I walked in for water, she repeated. And you there. The restaurant had gone on around us this whole time, families finishing breakfast, servers clearing tables. The ordinary Saturday morning continuing while the world I'd built over 70 years crumbled into pieces. Simone's eyes held mine, and they were desperate and exhausted and pleading all at once. So now you know, she said. The question is, what are you going to do about it? The tires crunched over gravel as I turned onto the private lane, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. My daughter-in-law declared dead 5 years ago, breathing in the passenger seat beside me. I'd answered Simone's question in the restaurant with 4 words. I'm going to help. Then I'd paid the check. Collected Ivy from Linda's care with promises to explain later. And loaded Simone and Finn into my Mercedes before anyone could ask questions I didn't have answers for yet. The 45-minute drive to Chad's Ford passed in near silence. Simone watched the road with the hypervigilance of someone who'd spent 5 years looking over her shoulder. In the back seat, Finn had fallen asleep within 10 minutes, his small body finally releasing the tension I'd seen in the restaurant. The exhaustion of a child who'd been running since he was 5 years old. My mind wouldn't settle. Cedric tried to murder Simone. The sentence played on repeat, each word refusing to connect to reality. My son. The boy I'd taught to sail, to read blueprints, to shake hands firmly and look people in the eye. The man I'd trusted with a significant portion of the business. The GPS voice broke the silence. In 800 feet, turn right. I realized I'd been holding my breath. The Pemberton estate appeared through the oak trees, a 3-bedroom colonial set well back from the road. Exactly as Douglas Pemberton had described it when he'd given me the key 3 years ago. My college roommate had retired to Tuscany with his wife, but he'd kept the Pennsylvania property for when their children visited. Use it whenever you need to, he'd said. Better to have someone checking on it than leaving it empty. I'd never imagined needing it like this. I parked in the circular drive and killed the engine. For a moment, none of us moved. We're here, I said unnecessarily. Simone nodded, her hand already on the door handle. She woke Finn gently, and he stumbled out of the car with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this too many times, arriving at strange houses in the middle of the night, never quite sure how long they'd stay. The key still worked. The house smelled faintly of cedar and old books. I showed Simone and Finn to separate bedrooms on the 2nd floor. Both clean, both with fresh linens from the last time Douglas's daughter had visited. There's food in the pantry, I said. Non-perishables, but enough for a few days. I'll arrange for groceries tomorrow. Simone stood in the doorway of the larger bedroom. And for the first time since the restaurant, some of the tension left her shoulders. Thank you, she said quietly. Russell, Rest, I interrupted. We'll figure out the next steps tomorrow. Finn had already closed his door. I heard the lock click, another practiced reflex. I retreated downstairs to the study. A wood-paneled room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a desk that probably hadn't been used in months. I stood there, hands braced against the desk's surface, and let the full weight of it hit me. Cedric tried to kill Simone. Every instinct screamed at me to get back in the car. Drive to Longport, where Cedric lived, pound on his door, and demand answers. To grab my son by the shoulders and ask him how he could do this. To see the truth in his eyes when I confronted him with what Simone had told me. But 40 years building a business had taught me something that went against every paternal impulse I had. Emotion destroys evidence. If Cedric had tried to kill Simone, if he'd embezzled money, sabotaged a boat, let her be declared dead for 5 years while he collected insurance and played the grieving widower. Then confronting him now would do one thing, Put him on alert. Give him time to destroy whatever proof existed. Let him craft a counter-narrative before I even knew what I was looking for. I pulled out my phone. My hand shook as I scrolled through my contacts. Set it down. Picked it up again. Philip Donovan had been my attorney for 18 years, handling everything from marina acquisitions to estate planning, with the same unflappable precision. If anyone could help me navigate this legally, methodically, it was Philip. He answered on the second ring. "Russell," he said, his voice warm. "Didn't expect to hear from you on a Saturday." "Philip." I kept my voice steady. "I need a forensic investigation, chain of custody, full documentation. Something happened 5 years ago that involves my family and my company." A pause. When Philip spoke again, the warmth had shifted to professional focus. "What kind of investigation are we talking about?" "I can't give you details yet," I said. "But I need this done properly, legally airtight, nothing that could be questioned later." "Is this criminal?" I looked toward the ceiling, where Simone was sleeping, where my daughter-in-law, who'd been dead for 5 years, was finally, impossibly safe. "Potentially," I said. Another pause, then, "Russell, does this involve the pension fund?" My blood ran cold. "Why would you ask that?" "I've been copied on some quarterly compliance reports from Cedric's office over the past 18 months, Philip said carefully. "Nothing actionable. But there were some timing discrepancies that seemed unusual for a firm as tight as Hastings Coastal. I assumed you knew about them." "I've never seen those reports," I said. Silence on the other end of the line. "I assumed it was intentional delegation," Philip said finally, "that you'd asked Cedric to handle pension compliance directly." "Send me everything," I said. "Every report you have, everything Cedric sent you that he didn't send me. I'll have it to you within the hour." Unbidden, a memory surfaced. Cedric at 23, presenting his first quarterly report to the board, so earnest, so eager to prove himself capable. "I won't let you down, Dad." How long ago had that promise broken? "Russell," Philip said, his voice dropping. "If there's regulatory exposure here, if this involves pension fund violations, we need to move fast but carefully. The statute of limitations clock may already be running on some of this." "I understand." "How bad do you think this is?" I looked toward the bedroom where Simone slept. 5 years of running, 5 years of hiding, 5 years of being dead while my son went on with his life. "I don't know yet," I said. "But Philip, whatever you find, I need to know every detail before Cedric knows we're looking." 3 days later, I met the man who would prove my son was a killer in a marina parking lot that smelled of salt and diesel. Philip had worked quickly. By Monday afternoon, he'd arranged for Desmond Pierce, a licensed marine safety inspector with 30 years of experience examining boat casualties for insurance companies, Coast Guard reviews, and the occasional criminal case. His reputation for finding what others missed had earned Philip's trust, and right now I needed someone who wouldn't miss anything. Desmond was in his late 50s, weathered skin and careful eyes, the kind of man who'd spent more time on boats than in boardrooms. He shook my hand firmly in the Cape May Marina parking lot, then got straight to business. "I don't form conclusions until I see the evidence," he said. "But if there's something to find, I'll find it." "The boat was declared a total loss," I said. "Insurance paid out 5 years ago. But I had it moved to the marine facility storage yard instead of scrapping it." Philip looked at me sharply. "You kept it." "Instinct," I said. Something about the whole thing felt wrong, even then. I couldn't articulate why, but I wasn't ready to destroy it. "Smart," Philip said. "Chain of custody matters if this becomes criminal." "If." The word hung in the air like a challenge. We drove separately to the Cape May Marine Storage Facility, a sprawling warehouse complex where damaged vessels went to wait for insurance decisions or salvage operations. The facility keeper, A taciturn man named Barnes unlocked Bay 7 and stepped aside. The yacht sat under harsh fluorescent lights, and seeing it again after 5 years hit me harder than I'd expected. The hull was split open like a cracked egg. The deck collapsed where the mast had fallen. Simone had been on this boat, had leaned over that rail, had fallen into black water while my son sailed away. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting the wreckage in surgical brightness that made every scar on the hull look fresh. "Take your time," Philip said quietly. "I know this isn't easy." "I'm fine," I said, though I wasn't. "Let's just get this done." Desmond was already moving, camera in hand, photographing the wreckage from multiple angles. He worked methodically, asking questions as he went. "Weather conditions that day?" he asked. "Squall line," I said, reciting what the Coast Guard report had said. "Sudden wind shift, gusts to 40 knots. It came up fast." Desmond nodded but said nothing, circling to examine the mast rigging point. He pulled out a measuring tape, noted angles, took more photographs. "Coast Guard report said cable failure due to metal fatigue and corrosion," he said. "You have a copy?" I handed him the folder I'd brought. He flipped through it, scanning the technical language, then set it aside. "Let's see if they were right," he said. He moved to the boom assembly, where the safety cable had snapped. The metal was crusted with 5 years of rust and salt corrosion, but Desmond produced a jeweler's loop and leaned in close. The silence stretched. My hands were steady as I stood there, holding the Coast Guard report. But my wedding ring caught the light, a small flash of gold that reminded me who had worn the matching band, who I'd lost, who I'd mourned, who my son had tried to murder. Desmond straightened, took several macro photographs, then gestured for Philip and me to come closer. "Look at this," he said, handing me the loop. Under magnification, the cable end told a different story than the Coast Guard report. Clean shear marks ran across approximately 60% of the cable's diameter, too clean, too straight to be the gradual failure of corroded metal. Faint blade striations were visible beneath the rust overlay. "This wasn't metal fatigue," Desmond said. "Look at these marks. That's a blade cut, approximately 60% through. The rest snapped under load, exactly as you'd expect in high wind conditions." "You're saying someone cut it deliberately?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I'm saying the Coast Guard investigator either missed this or didn't look close enough," Desmond said. "But yes, this cable was sabotaged before that yacht left the dock." Philip leaned in to see for himself, his expression darkening. "Can you document this?" he asked. "Already am," Desmond said, taking more photographs. "I'll write a full forensic report with chain of custody documentation. My credentials will hold up in court if it comes to that. When it comes to that." I thought. Desmond continued his examination. "I'm taking measurements, filling out forms with meticulous precision." Philip stood beside me, both of us watching as technical evidence transformed Simone's story from accusation into fact. "How long would it take to cut a cable like that?" I asked. Desmond looked up from his documentation. "With the right tool, 3 minutes. It's deliberate work, not something you do by accident or in anger." "This required planning, premeditation," Philip said quietly. "The boy who learned to tie sailor's knots on this very deck. The man who knew exactly which cable to cut." I thought about what that meant. Cedric hadn't acted in rage, hadn't improvised in panic. He'd made a decision, selected a tool, measured the cut precisely so it would hold long enough to get Simone offshore, then fail catastrophically when she leaned on it. He'd planned every detail, executed it methodically, then sailed home to call the Coast Guard and report a tragic accident. Desmond sealed the cable end in an evidence bag, signed and dated the documentation, handed his preliminary report to Philip. I didn't need to read it. The technical language would say what I already knew: my son had tried to kill his wife, had sabotaged the boat with precision and forethought. had let her be declared dead for 5 years while he continued running the business, living his life, playing the role of grieving widower. The question wasn't what happened anymore. I had proof of that now, physical, documented, court-admissible proof. The question was what else Cedric had been planning for 5 years while everyone thought Simone was dead. What he'd done with the company during that time. What those pension fund reports Philip mentioned contained. What other crimes I'd been blind to while building resorts and trusting my son. I'd built a company worth hundreds of millions by trusting my instincts, but walking into Jacqueline Whitmore's office that Wednesday morning, I prayed my instincts were wrong. Jacqueline had been Hastings Coastal's CFO for 12 years, brought on when the business grew beyond what I could manage with a bookkeeper. Her forensic accounting background had saved us twice during acquisition due diligence, catching problems before they became disasters. If anyone could tell me whether Simone's accusations about pension fund theft were real, it was her. "I need fresh eyes on the pension fund," I said, keeping my voice casual. "Cedric's been managing it, but with expansion talks heating up, I want independent confirmation everything's clean." Jacqueline looked up from her computer, surprise flickering across her face. She was 52, precise and methodical. The kind of person who noticed when numbers didn't add up. "Of course," she said. "Though Cedric's quarterly reports have always been solid. Is there a specific concern?" "Call it chairman's prerogative," I said. "And Jacqueline, just between us for now. No need to involve Cedric until we have findings." Her eyes sharpened at that, but she nodded. "I'll pull the records this morning." 2 hours later, my phone rang. "Russell?" Jacqueline said without preamble. "You need to see this." I was back in her office within 5 minutes. She'd pulled 5 years of pension fund statements and spread them across her desk in chronological order. Jacqueline's pen tapped against the spreadsheet, a rhythmic click that matched my pulse. "These transfers are legitimate on paper," she said, pointing to highlighted rows. "Pension fund to operational accounts for company matches and contributions. But the timing is oddly consistent." "How consistent?" I asked. "Like clockwork, every quarter. Right before external audit review, money moves. Then it's dispersed to what look like vendor payments. But I'd need to verify those vendors actually exist." She pulled up another screen, started cross-referencing vendor tax IDs against state business registries. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, and I watched her expression shift from professional curiosity to something darker. "The amounts stay just under reporting thresholds," she continued. "Nothing that would trigger automatic flags, but when you add them up over 5 years..." She stopped, calculating. "It's substantial," she said carefully. By Thursday afternoon, Philip had joined us in the conference room. Jacqueline had spent 18 hours tracing vendor payments through layers of corporate structures, and what she'd found made my earlier hope that Simone was wrong feel like the delusion it had been. "Coastal Maritime Services," Jacqueline said, sliding a Delaware LLC registration across the table. "Incorporated 5 years ago. No employees, no physical address. No legitimate business operations that I can find." I looked at the incorporation date. My chest tightened. "When exactly?" I asked. "April 2020, she said. 6 weeks before Simone's accident." 6 weeks before the accident. What kind of man plans his mother's murder while setting up offshore accounts? "Who's the registered agent?" Philip asked, though I already knew the answer. "Cedric Hastings," Jacqueline said. Philip and I exchanged a look. The murder attempt wasn't separate from the embezzlement. They were coordinated. Cedric had set up the theft infrastructure, and when Simone discovered it, he'd eliminated the threat. "How much?" I asked. Jacqueline hesitated. "I'm still calculating the final total. But Russell, this isn't sloppy bookkeeping. This is sophisticated financial engineering designed to avoid detection. Someone who understands our systems, our audit schedule, our reporting thresholds." "Cedric understands all of that," I said. "I taught it to him." By Friday morning, Jacqueline had the final numbers. She presented them in the same conference room, Philip beside me. Both of us braced for what we already suspected would be devastating. $3.8 million, Jacqueline said. Diverted over 5 years through 62 separate transactions, each one structured to stay below federal reporting requirements. The number sat between us like a physical presence. The pension fund itself is technically still solvent, she continued. Because Cedric has been replacing the stolen money with company operational funds. It shows up as inflated business expenses, marina maintenance, consulting fees, equipment purchases that were never actually made. So the employees don't know, I said. The employees don't know their retirement is compromised. Jacqueline confirmed. But if the Department of Labor audits us, they'll shut us down, Philip finished. And these are people who've worked for us for decades. Christ. Russell. Some of them have been here since you built the first resort. 243 employees. I knew most of their names, their kids' names, how many years they've been with the company. There's more, Jacqueline said quietly. The offshore transfers accelerated significantly in the past 18 months. Whatever he needed the money for 5 years ago, he needs a lot more of it now. Philip pulled the documentation toward him, scanning page after page of transactions. Beyond the theft, this is pension fraud, wire fraud, and potential RICO exposure because of the shell company structure, he said. The statute of limitations gives us maybe 18 months before the earliest transactions expire. We need to act fast. If we report this to DOL now, what happens? I asked. Philip's expression was grim. If they find this before we have a remediation plan in place, they'll assume company-wide fraud. Your licenses, your properties, everything you've built, all of it's at risk. They could seize assets, freeze operations, destroy the business while they investigate. So we're trapped, I said. Report Cedric and lose the company. Stay quiet and we're complicit in the fraud. There's a third option, Philip said. We document everything, prepare full restitution, then self-report with a remediation plan already in motion. But we need leverage over Cedric first. We need him to cooperate, or at least not to fight. Jacqueline closed the audit folder. The number $3.8 million seemed to pulse between us. But what froze my blood wasn't the total. It was the acceleration pattern she'd shown me. Whatever Cedric needed that money for 5 years ago, he needed twice as much now. Something was escalating, something that required more and more cash. And I still didn't know what it was. The house in Rittenhouse Square had never felt this empty. Even in the 5 years I'd thought I lived here alone. I let myself in Friday evening, still wearing the suit from this morning's meeting with Jacqueline. The financial audit, the shell companies, the number that kept echoing in my head. $3.8 million stolen from people who'd trusted us with their retirement. The silence pressed against my ears. No wife, she'd been gone 7 years now. No grandchildren dropping by unannounced. No Simone, who used to stop by on Sundays with Finn. Back when Finn was small and his mother wasn't legally dead and his father wasn't a murderer. I dropped my keys on the entry table and walked through the house I'd lived in for 30 years. Every room felt like a museum exhibit of a life I'd thought I understood. The study waited at the end of the hall. I poured 2 fingers of scotch I had no intention of drinking and sank into the leather chair behind my desk. The room surrounded me with 40 years of achievement building awards on the shelves, architectural renderings on the walls, photographs spanning 4 decades of resort development from Maine to the Carolinas. Every frame a monument to what I'd built. The business, the reputation, the family legacy that was supposed to outlast me. The ice in the scotch glass shifted and cracked. The only sound in the room, my eyes drifted across the photographs. Groundbreakings, ribbon cuttings, board meetings. My younger self shaking hands with governors and investors. The company growing from 1 marina to 50 properties. The empire I'd built on the principle that foundations either hold or they don't. There is no middle ground. One photo stopped me. Cedric at 24, hard hat on, standing beside me at the first Cape May resort groundbreaking. I remembered that day with painful clarity, June of 2001. The weather had been perfect, the crowd enthusiastic. I'd handed Cedric the ceremonial shovel, a symbolic passing of responsibility, and felt pride expand in my chest like sunlight. The business would continue. My son would carry forward what I'd started. In the photo, Cedric's smile was genuine, eager. The smile of a young man who wanted desperately to prove himself worthy of his father's trust. I picked up the frame, studied his face. When had that changed? When had the eager successor become the calculating criminal? Always build for the worst-case scenario. Cedric. That's how you make things last. My own voice echoed in memory. 20 years younger. So certain I was teaching him something valuable. And he'd learned. God help me, he'd learned every lesson I taught him. I'd taught Cedric everything about foundations. How to survey land, test soil composition, build structures that would withstand decades of coastal weather. How to read blueprints and understand load-bearing calculations. How shortcuts kill in construction and in business, and proper planning always beats rushed execution. I'd taught him that lasting work requires patience and precision. He'd planned Simone's murder 6 weeks in advance, set up the shell company, structured the embezzlement to avoid detection thresholds, cut the safety cable with surgical precision designed to fail under load. He'd built a lie engineered to last 5 years and counting. Every principle I drilled into him, attention to detail, long-term planning, building for endurance, he'd applied to fraud and murder. I set down the scotch glass, untouched. The foundation metaphor I'd built my entire life on was turning to ash in my hands. I'd spent 40 years teaching my son to build things that endure, to think 3 steps ahead, to understand that the difference between success and failure was in the planning, not the execution. And Cedric had taken those lessons and built a criminal enterprise with the same careful methodology I'd used to build resorts. The shell company incorporated 6 weeks before the murder, the embezzlement structured to avoid reporting thresholds. The safety cable cut precisely enough to hold until the right moment. The 5-year cover-up maintained with the same attention to detail I'd demanded in quarterly reports. I'd taught him all of it. Not the crime itself, I'd never taught him. To steal, to kill, to lie. But I'd taught him how. I'd given him the tools, the methodology, the framework for building something that would last even under pressure. He'd just applied it to building a fraud instead of a resort. What do you do when the son you taught to build becomes the architect of ruin? The legacy I'd spent 40 years building wasn't just damaged by Cedric's crimes. It wasn't even corrupted by them. It was the weapon. Every lesson about foundations and structural integrity had become methodology for murder. Every principle about patient planning had enabled premeditated crime. Every value I'd instilled about building things that last had been turned against everything I'd actually built. The employees whose pensions he'd stolen, I'd taught him how to understand those financial structures well enough to exploit them. The wife he'd tried to murder, I'd taught him about boats and weather and equipment maintenance, giving him the knowledge to sabotage a yacht convincingly. The evidence he'd hidden for 5 years, I'd taught him about chain of custody and documentation and how systems could be gamed if you understood them well enough. I've been so proud of teaching him to think like an engineer, to see systems and understand how they worked, to build with precision and foresight. I'd never considered he might use those skills to destroy instead of create. The photographs on the walls stared back at me 40 years of buildings, of achievements, of a legacy I'd thought would mean something. But what did any of it mean if the son I'd trained to carry it forward had turned every lesson into a tool for crime? I picked up the photo of Cedric at 24 again. That eager young man in the hard hat, so desperate to make me proud. Somewhere in the 15 years between that groundbreaking and Simone's murder, The boy who learned to build foundations had started building lies instead. And I still didn't know why. What had changed him from the son who wanted to prove himself worthy into the man who could cut a safety cable and sail away while his wife drowned? What had transformed legitimate ambition into criminal desperation? The money was going somewhere. Accelerating amounts over the past 18 months. Cedric needed that stolen money for something urgent enough to risk everything. But what had... Saturday morning. I brought pancake mix and syrup to the Chad's Ford safe house, trying to be the grandfather I'd lost 5 years to be. The night before, sitting alone in my study, I'd realized I couldn't just compile evidence and build legal cases. Somewhere in this mess of fraud and attempted murder was a 10-year-old boy who barely knew me. A grandson I'd mourned when I thought his mother had drowned, then lost again to 5 years of hiding. I arrived mid-morning with groceries and an awkward eagerness I hadn't felt in years. Simone answered the door. The exhaustion on her face made something crack in my chest. She'd slept. But not well. The kind of fitful rest that comes from 5 years of never fully relaxing. I thought maybe we could make breakfast together, I said, holding up the bag. If you want. Finn watched from the stairs, wary but curious. He was thin, too thin, with dark eyes that held too much knowledge for a child. He's not used to normal, Simone said quietly. Give him time. I like pancakes, Finn offered, his voice barely above a whisper. In the kitchen, I showed him how to mix the batter, how to test the griddle temperature with drops of water that danced and sizzled. Finn watched my hands with intense focus. Methodical and careful in a way that reminded me painfully of Cedric at that age. My dad taught me this, I said. And I taught your father, when he was about your age. Finn's hands paused over the mixing bowl. Dad doesn't cook. No, I said carefully. I guess he doesn't. The pancakes smelled like every Saturday morning I wished I'd had with this grandson. Butter and vanilla and the warmth of someone to share breakfast with. Finn poured his first pancake onto the griddle with concentrated precision. When he flipped it successfully golden brown on both sides, a smile flickered across his face. The first real smile I'd seen from him. Perfect, I said. You're a natural. We carried the plates to the dining table, where Simone sat with coffee that had long since gone cold. She watched Finn with a mix of love and bone-deep weariness that made me understand how much the running had cost her. 14 times in 5 years, she said quietly, as if answering a question I hadn't asked. Different cities, different names, different schools for Finn. I had 3 schools in 3rd grade, Finn said matter-of-factly, cutting his pancakes into precise squares. Mrs. Harrison was nice. She let me keep my books when we left. 3 schools in 1 grade. I tried to imagine it learning new names, new faces, new classrooms, knowing you'd leave before anyone got close enough to ask questions. 14 moves. 42 months. How many nights had Finn lain awake wondering if tomorrow they'd run again? That's over now, I said, though I wasn't sure yet how to make that true. You're safe here. Simone's eyes met mine over Finn's head, and in them I saw doubt. 5 years of running had taught her that safety was temporary, that every moment of peace was borrowed time. Finn ate methodically, the way someone eats who learned not to waste food. No complaints, no requests for seconds, just quiet efficiency. After breakfast, while Simone cleared the plates, I noticed something by the front door. A small backpack. Packed, zipped, ready. What's in the backpack, Finn? I asked. He glanced at it, then back at me. Just stuff, in case we need to run. Mom says always be ready. He packs it himself, Simone said from the kitchen doorway, her voice cracking. I tried to tell him he doesn't need to anymore, but... Finn stood and walked to the backpack with the unconscious certainty of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Clothes, toothbrush, My tablet. Granola bars, he explained. The essentials. You pack the important stuff first. That way, if you only have 10 seconds, you still get it. My hand hovered over the backpack, but didn't touch it, as if opening it would make the horror too real. He times himself, Simone said. He can be out the door in under a minute. Backpack, shoes, jacket, gone. A 10-year-old boy who'd internalized evacuation protocols the way other children internalized multiplication tables. Who'd learned that survival meant staying light, staying ready, never getting too comfortable. You won't need to run anymore. Finn, I said, kneeling beside him, I promise you. He looked at me with those two old eyes. Mom promised that in Memphis, and in Portland, and in Tucson. Each city a temporary illusion of safety. Each departure another lesson that nothing lasted. Simone's hand went to her mouth, and I saw 5 years of guilt and grief and desperate maternal protection collapse into tears she'd been holding back since I'd found her in that restaurant. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I didn't know how else to keep him safe. You did keep him safe, I said. You kept him alive. But that's over now. Cedric doesn't get to control your lives anymore. Finn's small hand rested on the backpack strap. A talisman, a security blanket made of emergency supplies and practiced fear. Can I keep it? He asked. Just for a little while? Until I'm sure? You can keep it as long as you need, I said, though the words tasted like failure. What Cedric had stolen wasn't just money or years. He'd stolen the ability of a child to feel safe, to trust that tomorrow would come without requiring an escape plan, to believe that home was something more than a temporary stopping point between flights. That night, back in Rittenhouse Square, I couldn't stop thinking about that backpack. A 10-year-old boy who packed emergency supplies by instinct, who timed evacuation drills, who ate like someone who might not get another meal, who'd had 3 schools in 3rd grade and 14 homes in 5 years. Cedric hadn't just tried to kill Simone. He'd murdered Finn's childhood and called it survival. And I was done investigating. Done compiling evidence. Done being methodical and patient. It was time to end this. Philip called Monday evening with 3 words that changed everything. He knows we're looking. I'd spent the day trying to be normal, returning emails, reviewing acquisition proposals, pretending my son wasn't a murderer and thief. When Philip's call came, I was staring at a contract I'd read 3 times without comprehending a word. How do you know? I asked. The IT monitoring I set up 3 weeks ago, Philip said. Can you come to my office? You need to see this. 20 minutes later, I sat in Philip's conference room, watching security logs scroll across his laptop screen. Each line a timestamp, a file accessed, an action taken. Digital evidence of my son's panic. Monday morning. Cedric ran his monthly security audit, Philip explained, pointing to entries from earlier that day. Standard procedure checking system access, reviewing who's been in which files. He does it the first Monday of every month. The timestamp showed 9:47 a.m. A file access log from Hastings Coastal Server. Cedric's credentials pulling system reports. He saw that Jacqueline accessed the pension fund archives 3 weeks ago, Philip continued. June 18. The same day you asked her to audit the pension fund. I watched the log entries. Cedric opening the access report. Pausing for exactly 43 seconds, I could imagine him staring at his screen. Coffee halfway to his mouth. Realizing someone had been looking at records from 2020. From the month he'd tried to kill Simone. What did he do? I asked. Philip advanced the timeline. He pulled the same records Jacqueline had accessed, spent 90 minutes reviewing his own handiwork from 5 years ago. More log entries. Pension fund reports, vendor invoices, shell company documentation. Cedric methodically checking every file Jacqueline had touched, verifying what she might have seen. Cedric's fingers hovering over the delete key, then moving to edit instead. Deletion leaves traces. Revision looks like routine maintenance.
Then he started cleaning up, Philip said. Watch.
The logs showed Cedric opening vendor files, adjusting invoice dates, modifying descriptions, making the coastal maritime services payments blend better with legitimate contractors, smoothing out the too perfect patterns that had triggered Jacqueline's suspicion. How many files? I asked. By end of day, 47 documents revised, each change time-stamped, logged and mirrored to our forensics server. 47 attempts to hide the evidence. 47 counts of obstruction that Cedric didn't know we were recording. Philip clicked to a different log. At 11:23 a.m. he called you. I remembered that call. Cedric's voice casual, asking about succession planning, mentioning he wanted to formalize company structure. I'd played my part. Sounded tired, distracted. Said I was thinking about stepping back more. Does Russell actually suspect? Or is the old man finally just tired? I'd heard the question in Cedric's tone, the subtle test embedded in casual conversation. And I'd lied to my son with the same careful precision he'd been lying to me for 5 years. You were convincing, Philip said. The logs show he relaxed after that call, started making other moves. What moves? Philip brought up phone records. 3 encrypted calls to his offshore account manager. I don't have the content he's using, a VPN and encryption software, but I have the timing, duration, and the fact that shortly after, we see unusual activity in the Cayman accounts. He pulled up financial monitoring reports. Money moving between shell entities. Not withdrawals that would have triggered alerts, but shuffling funds through intermediary accounts, obscuring the trail. How much? I asked. $1.2 million moved between Monday afternoon and Tuesday morning, Philip said. All of it staying technically within his existing corporate structures, but making it harder to trace the original source. I watched the numbers flow across the screen. My son, methodically covering his tracks with the same attention to detail I'd taught him. Building defenses he thought were invisible, like a spider wrapping silk around itself, mistaking the web for protection. He doesn't know we're watching, I said. No, Philip confirmed. The IT forensics setup is completely passive. We're mirroring his system access in real time, but from his perspective, everything looks normal. No alerts, no flags, no indication that every move he makes is being documented. How long have you been monitoring him? Since June 16th, Philip said. 2 days before you asked Jacqueline to run the audit. I wanted to make sure that if Cedric discovered what we were doing, we'd have evidence of his response. 3 weeks of monitoring. 3 weeks of watching my son's digital footprints, building a case one logged action at a time. By 6 p.m. Monday, Cedric locked his office and went home, Philip continued. The logs show him feeling secure. He'd cleaned up the obvious patterns, moved the money, tested you and found you oblivious. From his perspective, he'd handled the threat. Philip's expression was grim. He has no idea that everything he did to cover his tracks just created 47 new pieces of evidence. Every file revision is time-stamped. Every encrypted call is logged. Every dollar movement is documented. Obstruction of justice, I said, among other charges. If we'd only had Simone's testimony and the original financial records, he could have claimed the embezzlement was accounting errors, that the boat sabotage was our imagination. But this, Philip gestured to the screens, this is active cover-up. This is consciousness of guilt. I stared at the logs. 47 documents. 3 encrypted calls. Over $1 million moved. All of it captured, preserved, ready for court. My son had walked into a trap he didn't know existed, and every attempt to escape had just pulled the net tighter. When do we move? I asked. That's what we need to decide, Philip said. We can wait, gather more evidence as he continues to panic and clean up. Or we can act now, while he thinks he's safe. Both options have risks. What kind of risks? If we wait, he might discover the monitoring. Or worse, he might decide to run. The money's already moving, that could be preparation for flight. I thought about Finn's backpack, packed and ready by the door for 5 years. About Simone's exhausted face after 14 moves. About my grandson timing evacuation drills instead of playing baseball. And if we move now, we have enough to prosecute, Philip said. But we don't know what else he's hiding. What other crimes we haven't uncovered yet. 2 miles away. Cedric probably sat in his house believing he'd dodged disaster, believing his father was oblivious and his tracks were covered. He had no idea the web was already complete. Finn found me in the study Saturday afternoon, cradling something wrapped in an old beach towel. "Grandpa, can I show you something?" I set down the financial reports Philip had compiled. Thousands of pages documenting Cedric's theft, and waved him over. The boy had been quieter than usual since Simone's return, processing what it meant that his mother had been alive all this time. "Of course," I said. "What have you got there?" He unwrapped the towel carefully, revealing a wooden boat perhaps 8 inches long. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Dovetailed joints, hand-carved details along the hull. A tiny brass anchor that actually raised and lowered on miniature chains. "This is beautiful work," I said, running my fingers along the smooth planking. "Where did you find it?" "Mom made it for me," Finn said quietly. Before the boat trip. She told me to keep it safe, no matter what." I looked at him sharply. "Simone made this—" He nodded. "She used to build things in the garage. Said her dad taught her when she was little." His fingers traced the stern. "She gave it to me the morning they left for the coast. Told me it was special." I examined the boat more closely. The wood was aged cherry, the finish still pristine despite 5 years and a 10-year-old's possession. The level of detail was remarkable. Tiny cleats, a working rudder, deck planking that showed individual nail heads smaller than pinpricks. "Your mother is full of surprises," I murmured. Simone appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She'd been staying in the East Wing guest suite, giving Finn space to adjust while remaining close. The reunion had been tearful but complicated. 5 years was an eternity in a child's life. "You kept it," she said softly, stepping into the study. Finn turned, clutching the boat. "You told me to keep it safe. I did." "I know, sweetheart." She crossed to us, her hand hovering over the boat, but not quite touching it. "Did you show Grandpa the special part?" The boy shook his head. Simone's eyes met mine. "May I?" I handed her the boat. Watching as she turned it over in her hands, her fingers found a nearly invisible seam along the keel. She pressed a hidden catch, and the bottom quarter of the hull separated with a soft click. Inside was a compartment lined with waterproof material. And nestled within that compartment was a 2-terabyte external hard drive, sealed in a plastic bag. "Jesus," I breathed. 5 years of documentation, Simone said. Extracting the drive, bank transfers, emails, meeting recordings. I started collecting it 6 months before Cedric tried to kill me. The boat was my insurance policy. I knew you'd eventually find Finn if something happened to me. I gambled that Cedric wouldn't look twice at a child's toy. If this story hits close to home, type evidence below. I read every response. Remember, details here are fictionalized for privacy, but the betrayal was real. My hands were shaking as I took the drive from her. The weight of it, maybe half a pound, somehow felt enormous. "You've been protecting this the whole time," I said to Finn. He nodded solemnly. "Mom said it was important. I kept it in my closet. Dad never noticed." I wondered how many times Cedric had walked past his son's room, mere feet from the evidence that could destroy him. The irony was almost poetic. "Philip needs to see this," I said. Simone checked her watch. "He should be here in 20 minutes. I called him an hour ago." Of course she had. My daughter-in-law had spent 5 years staying 3 steps ahead of my son's murder attempts. She knew how to plan. Finn had retreated to the window seat, watching us with the careful attention of a child who'd learned too young that adults couldn't always be trusted. I wanted to tell him everything would be fine, that we'd fix this. But I'd learned not to make promises I couldn't guarantee. "What's on it?" I asked Simone. She sat down heavily in the leather chair across from my desk. Proof that the pension fund theft went even deeper than the $3.8 million I first found. Bank transfers, emails, meeting recordings, everything I couldn't prove alone. The room tilted slightly. $3.8 million. And now the proof to make it stick. Where did it go? Offshore accounts, cryptocurrency. He's been building an exit strategy. Her voice was flat, clinical. I found communications with a lawyer in Grand Cayman. Cedric's been planning to disappear. New identity, new life. He not needed to liquidate a few more assets first. "And you," I said slowly. "You were an asset he needed to liquidate." "I was the only person who'd noticed the discrepancies," she confirmed. "I made the mistake of confronting him privately first. Thought maybe there was an explanation." That's when I saw his face change. That's when I knew. Finn had gone very still by the window. Simone noticed. "Baby, why don't you go find Mrs. Callahan? I think she was making cookies." He didn't argue, just slipped out quietly. The boy had learned to read rooms, to know when adults needed to speak in private. Another thing childhood shouldn't have taught him. When the door closed, Simone leaned forward. "The hard drive has something else. Russell, something I need you to see before Philip gets here." "What?" Her expression was grim. Evidence of exactly how deep this goes, every transaction, every offshore account, everything he thought he'd hidden. The spreadsheet on Philip's conference room screen showed 5 years of Simone's meticulous documentation. And every line made my son look more like a stranger. "Walk me through it again," I said to Simone, who sat across from me Tuesday morning. "From the start." She nodded slowly, her eyes on the spreadsheet. "I documented everything I could reach before he found out I knew. Bank transfers, invoices, the audit trail, all of it. What we had in front of us was damning enough. Philip's IT specialist had extracted the hard drive data over the weekend. The conference room display showed folders of evidence spreadsheets tracking pension fund discrepancies, screenshots of Cedric's emails, PDF bank statements highlighting transfers, and video files. "She recorded herself," Philip said. Clicking open a file dated April 2020, Simone's face appeared on screen. Younger but already tired-looking. The timestamp read 3 days before the boat accident. "My name is Simone Hastings. I'm documenting this because I confronted my husband today about financial irregularities I discovered in the Hastings Development pension accounts." Cedric denied everything, but I saw his face when I showed him the transaction records. He knows that I know. I'm scared of what happens next. The video continued for 6 minutes, Simone methodically explaining what she'd found, where the evidence was stored, naming me as the person who needed to see it if anything happened to her. 3 days later, the boat exploded. "She knew," I said. And he knew she knew. Jacqueline Whitmore had arrived earlier with her updated audit files, and Simone's 5-year-old records matched every transaction she'd already traced. "Whatever he needed the money for in 2020, he needs a lot more of it now," Jacqueline said, sliding both sets of records side by side. "The recent amounts aren't just larger, they're desperate. He's taking bigger risks, moving money faster." "Where is it going?" I asked. Philip glanced at the door. "That's why I asked Marcus to join us." Marcus Fletcher had spent 15 years tracing money for the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit before going private, and his reputation for following offshore funds made him Philip's first call when the Cayman account surfaced. The man who entered looked more like a college professor than a forensic accountant. Wire-rimmed glasses, corduroy jacket, a leather satchel worn soft with age. "Mr. Hastings," he said, shaking my hand. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. What did you find? Marcus connected his laptop to the display. A network diagram appeared, accounts linked by arrows showing money flow from Hastings Development to the Cayman Islands, then branching to Singapore, Macau, Gibraltar. The funds don't stay offshore, Marcus said. They move within 48 hours to secondary accounts in these jurisdictions, all licensed gambling centers. The room went quiet. The money transfers to online gambling platforms. Marcus continued. High-stakes poker rooms, sports betting syndicates, virtual casinos. I can confirm 2.9 million of the total went directly to gambling accounts. The remaining amount is harder to trace, but the pattern suggests the same destination. I stared at the screen. My son, the boy I'd taught to fish, to negotiate contracts, to build something lasting, had stolen from his own employees to feed a gambling addiction. How much has he lost? Marcus hesitated. Based on account activity, betting patterns, and cross-referencing with known markers at offshore casinos, I estimate Cedric has outstanding gambling debts of approximately $4.7 million. How do you mourn the son you thought you raised while hunting the criminal he became? He's underwater by nearly $1 million, Marcus said. And the debt's been accelerating for 18 months. The people he owes money to, they're not credit card companies. These are offshore operations with enforcement methods that don't involve lawyers. Philip leaned back. The embezzlement wasn't ambition. It was survival. He killed his wife to cover gambling debts. I heard the disbelief in my own voice. He tried to kill his wife, Jacqueline corrected quietly, to cover up the fact that she'd discovered he was stealing to cover gambling debts. The debts came first. The murder attempt was damage control. The distinction somehow made it worse. Marcus packed up his materials, leaving printed reports for Philip's files. When he'd gone, Philip closed the laptop and looked at me with brutal honesty. We're not dealing with a calculated criminal anymore, he said. We're dealing with a desperate addict who owes money to dangerous people. Cedric tried to murder once to protect his secret. If he realizes we're closing in, he won't just run. He'll do whatever it takes to survive. I thought of the cable Desmond had shown me under the loop. Cut clean by a man with nothing left to lose the first time. A cornered animal doesn't surrender, it bites. We need to move Simone and Finn to a more secure location, I said. Today. Already arranged, Philip replied. I have a colleague who handles witness protection for white-collar cases. Safe house, armed security, completely off-grid. They can be moved this afternoon. Jacqueline gathered her files. What about Cedric? Do we confront him, or go straight to federal authorities? The question hung in the air. My son, my company, my employees' stolen pensions, my daughter-in-law and grandson in hiding because a man I'd raised had tried to murder them. I need to think, I said. That afternoon, I authorized the move to Philip's safe house. Simone packed quickly, efficiently. She'd had practice running. Finn clutched his wooden boat. The empty compartment now just a toy again. As I watched them leave through the service entrance, my phone buzzed. A text from Cedric. Dad, can we have dinner this week, just the two of us? There are some things I need to tell you. I stared at the message. The trap was set. I just didn't know if I was the hunter or the hunted. Cedric arrived Thursday evening with a bottle of my favorite scotch and photos of Finn that I'd never seen. And the trap was more sophisticated than I'd expected. I debated for 3 days whether to accept his dinner invitation. Philip had argued for maintaining the facade. Let Cedric think I suspected nothing while we finalized the case. Simone had been less certain, worried that Cedric might be testing me, looking for cracks in my ignorance. Now, watching my son settle into the leather chair in my Rittenhouse Square living room, I understood this wasn't a test. It was a chess move. Macallan 25, Cedric said, setting the bottle on the side table. I remember you bought a case when I graduated from Wharton. I had, 23 years ago. proud of the son who'd earned his MBA, ready to join the family business and build something lasting. The memory felt like it belonged to someone else's life. "That was a good night," I said carefully. Cedric pulled an envelope from his jacket. "I brought something else. Photos from Finn's last few visits." He spread them across the coffee table. Finn at a baseball game, Phillies cap askew. Finn building a sandcastle at some beach I didn't recognize. Finn reading on a porch swing, absorbed in whatever story held his attention. He's 10 now. Dad. 10 years old, and I've missed so much of it. Cedric's voice carried the right note of regret. I want to do better. I picked up the baseball photo. Finn's gap-toothed grin was so achingly genuine it hurt to look at. "Where is Finn living now?" I asked. "With Simone's sister in Baltimore. I see him twice a month, supervised visits. Court ordered after the custody evaluation." Cedric shook his head. "But I want more. I want to be the father he deserves." The photo Cedric slid across the table showed Finn in a Phillies cap, gap-toothed grin, absolutely unaware of the war being waged around him. I set down the photo, meeting Cedric's eyes. He looked tired but earnest, a man wrestling with fatherhood and loss. The performance was flawless. If I hadn't seen Simone's evidence, hadn't watched the video of her explaining how she'd confronted him 3 days before he tried to kill her, I might have believed him. "Finn's lucky to have you fighting for him," I said. We moved to the dining room for dinner. Cold roast beef sandwiches, nothing elaborate. Cedric talked about work, about the Newport project coming in under budget, about a new hire in the acquisitions department. Normal conversation. Father and son discussing the family business over a Thursday meal. Then he shifted. "I've been thinking about legacy lately," Cedric said, refilling his water glass. "About what we're building, what we're passing down. You've created something remarkable, Dad. Hastings Development isn't just a company, it's a reputation, a name that means something." "We've been fortunate," I said. "Finn asks about the business sometimes, about carrying on what we built." Cedric smiled. "He asked me if he could work at the marina next summer." 10 years old, already thinking about the family business. The message was clear as cathedral bells. Exposing Cedric didn't just destroy a criminal, it destroyed a father. It orphaned a boy who'd already lost his mother. "When are you thinking about retirement?" Cedric asked. "The board's been asking, not pushing, just planning for succession." "I haven't decided," I said. "No rush." Cedric leaned back. "You've built something good, Dad. Something Finn can be proud of. I don't want anything to tarnish that." "No," I said quietly. "Neither do I. How do you choose between justice for the dead and mercy for the living, when they're the same family?" Cedric finished his scotch an hour later. At the door, he did something he hadn't done in years. He hugged me. Not the brief, obligatory embrace of holidays, but a real hug, holding on for several seconds. "I won't let you down, Dad," he said. "Not this time." "We'll talk more before the board meeting," I managed. After he left, I stood in the doorway holding one of the photos he'd left behind. Finn at the baseball game, smiling, unaware his father was a murderer and his mother was alive and hiding. I went to my study and poured the scotch Cedric had brought. Then I set the glass down without drinking. Cedric's calculation was precise. I could destroy the criminal, but only by destroying the father, which would destroy the child. Just required collateral damage I couldn't stomach. He'd found the one defense my evidence couldn't overcome, a grandfather's love. I stared at Finn's photo for 20 minutes, trapped between what was right and what would hurt least. Then I called Simone's secure line. "He came," I said when she answered. "And he weaponized Finn. Showed me photos. Talked about being a better father. About legacy and family reputation. The subtext was clear. Exposing him destroys our grandson's life. Simone was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady. He's right that exposing him hurts Finn. But Finn is already hurt. Russell. 5 years of running hurt him. Living with lies hurt him. We find a third way. What third way? Simone's voice didn't waver. 5 years of running had taught her that protecting Finn sometimes meant fighting, not fleeing. We pursue full justice, Simone said. But we establish legal guardianship with you before the arrest. Finn doesn't go to foster care when Cedric goes to prison. He goes to his grandfather. I felt something unlock in my chest. Cedric thinks he's the only father Finn has. Simone continued. But Finn has you, and he has me. We're his protection. Can Philip make that legal before we move? He'll have to. Because we're done hiding. Russell. And Cedric's done using our son as a shield. I looked at Finn's photo again. This time I saw not a reason to stop, but a reason to finish. I'll call Philip tonight, I said. Good. Tell him we need guardianship paperwork filed within 72 hours. Then we move. After we hung up. I sat in my study until midnight, planning. Philip started the emergency guardianship paperwork the next morning. The timeline was set. Board meeting in 3 days, federal authorities on standby, guardianship filed 24 hours before arrest. But that afternoon, my phone rang. Jacqueline's voice had ice in it. Cedric just transferred $800,000 offshore, she said. He's running. The boardroom had never looked more like a courtroom, though only 2 people in the room knew it yet. When Jacqueline called Friday about the offshore transfer, Philip had acted immediately. Emergency guardianship papers filed within hours. Federal prosecutors briefed by Saturday morning. The decision let Cedric think he'd bought time while we accelerated everything. Monday's board meeting became the trap instead of the trigger. Now, watching board members settle into their chairs, coffee poured and folders distributed, I felt the weight of what came next. Let's call the meeting to order, I said. We have a full agenda today. William Morrison, who'd served on the Hastings Coastal Board for 15 years, bringing maritime law expertise from his career as Admiralty Counsel, moved to approve last quarter's minutes. Catherine Hayes, the board's independent director and former regional banking executive who'd never missed a quarterly meeting in 8 years. Seconded. Robert Brennan, representing minority shareholders and a friend since the company went public in 1998, nodded agreement. Routine. Ritual. The calm before. Cedric sat to my right, relaxed and confident. He'd spent the weekend moving money, believing he'd created breathing room. Instead, he'd added wire fraud to his charges. Philip sat at the far end as corporate counsel. Legal pad pristine. Pen capped. Jacqueline had her laptop open, financial reports queued. In Philip's office 3 floors down, Simone watched via secure video feed. Outside, 2 federal agents waited in an unmarked sedan. Item 4, I said. Succession planning. Cedric. My son stood, clicked the presentation remote. His first slide appeared, Hastings Coastal Building, the next 4 decades. Thank you, Dad. Cedric's smile was easy, practiced. The board requested a comprehensive succession timeline. I have prepared a 5-year transition plan that honors this company's legacy while positioning us for sustained growth. He walked through it methodically. Charts showing revenue climbing, expansion into new markets, strategic hires. By month 18, I would transition to Chairman Emeritus Advisory role. Board seat, but executive authority transferred to Cedric. We've weathered storms, Cedric said, advancing to a slide showing the company timeline. Both literal and personal. The tragic loss of Simone 5 years ago tested us. But the foundation my father built held strong. Cedric's presentation slides gleamed on the screen, revenue projections climbing like ladders to heaven built on lies. He spoke about resilience, about family businesses surviving tragedy, about closed chapters and bright futures. Several board members nodded. Catherine made notes. William leaned back, listening with the careful attention of someone evaluating legal frameworks. This succession plan honors that foundation, Cedric concluded, while positioning us for the next 40 years. Questions from the board before we vote? Robert asked about transition timeline flexibility. Catherine wanted clarification on reporting structures, standard questions, the kind succession plans always generate. Cedric answered smoothly. I sat at the head of the table. Guardianship papers filed this morning. Federal agents outside. Simone watching from 3 floors down. I looked at my son, polished, articulate, lying with every breath. I thought of Finn's backpack packed for running. Simone's 5 years in hiding, the boat cable cut with surgical precision. I stood. The room quieted. It wasn't my turn to speak yet, but I was chairman. When I stood, people paid attention. Cedric, I said quietly, you mentioned Simone's tragic accident. Are you certain that's what happened? The room went absolutely still. Cedric's smile held, but something flickered behind his eyes. Dad, the Coast Guard investigation was thorough. Equipment failure. Weather conditions tragic, but accidental. My hand was steady on the table, but beneath it, my wedding ring caught the light. Simone's matching band was in an evidence locker 3 floors down. I nodded slowly. That's what the initial report said. I'd like the board to review some additional findings. Catherine's pen stopped moving. William sat forward. Additional findings. Cedric's voice stayed level, but his knuckles whitened on the presentation remote. Philip, would you distribute the materials we discussed? Philip stood, pulling a stack of folders from his briefcase. He walked the room's perimeter, placing one in front of each board member. Jacqueline received hers last, though she'd already seen everything. Cedric watched the folders land like incoming mortars. What is this? He asked. Evidence, I said simply. The board members opened their folders. Inside Desmond Pierce's marine forensics report. Macro photographs of the safety cable. Highlighted passages. Technical annotations explaining what the striations meant. Confusion shifted to shock as they read. Cedric's face drained of color. He started to speak, stopped, started again. This is Dad. What is this? This is a forensic analysis conducted by licensed Marine Safety Inspector Desmond Pierce, I said in the same quiet voice. Page 3 shows the blade striations. The safety cable was deliberately cut with a precision blade approximately 60% through, designed to fail under load. William flipped to page 3, studied the photograph. His maritime law background made him read the evidence faster than the others. Russell, Catherine said slowly, looking up from the report. Are you suggesting this wasn't an accident? I'm presenting evidence for the board's consideration. Robert's folder lay open to the cable photograph. The macro image showed it in brutal clarity, clean shear marks where a father decided his wife's life was negotiable. The macro photograph showed the cable end in brutal clarity, clean shear marks where a father decided his mother's life was negotiable. This doesn't make sense. Catherine continued. If the cable was cut deliberately, that would mean sabotage. William finished quietly. Intentional sabotage. Cedric found his voice. This is insane! Dad, you can't seriously— the Coast Guard cleared this 5 years ago! You're presenting some private analysis done by who? Some consultant? Desmond Pierce, Philip said calmly. 30 years with the National Transportation Safety Board before private practice. His credentials are on page 1. Catherine looked up from the forensics report, her face pale. Russell, if this cable was deliberately cut, are you saying Simone was murdered? I met my son's eyes across the table. I'm saying the evidence suggests sabotage. And there's more. Philip reached into his briefcase again, pulling out a second set of folders. Much more, I said. The second folder hit the mahogany table with a sound like a gavel, and Cedric's hand moved instinctively to loosen his tie. The board members were still processing the sabotage evidence. Catherine's face had gone pale. Robert kept rereading the forensics report. William had his Admiralty Council expression locked in place. I gave them a moment before continuing. I understand this is difficult to process, I said. But the evidence suggests Simone's death wasn't the crime, it was the cover-up for another crime. William looked up sharply. What are we looking at? Russell. Pension fund embezzlement. $3.8 million over 5 years. The room went very still. These were board members who'd approved pension contributions, who'd signed off on fiduciary responsibilities, who bore legal liability for employee retirement funds. Philip distributed the financial folders. Inside bank statements, wire transfer records, corporate formation documents for a company I'd never heard of. Coastal Maritime Services, LLC. Coastal Maritime Services was incorporated in April 2020, I said. 6 weeks before the yacht accident. Registered agent Cedric Hastings. The company has no employees, no physical operations, no legitimate business purpose. The bank statements spread across the table like a paper trail to hell. Each transaction dated and highlighted in Jacqueline's precise hand. Catherine flipped through the documents. This shell company received transfers from our pension fund. 62 transactions totaling $3.8 million, I confirmed. Bank records show the money moved to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands within 48 hours of each transfer. Cedric, Catherine said. You're the registered agent for this company. My son's color had drained, but he found his voice. That's a vendor account. For maritime services procurement, Dad. You know we work with dozens of contractors. This contractor has no business license, Philip said quietly. No tax returns filed, no employees registered. The only activity on record is receiving pension fund money and transferring it offshore. William was reading the incorporation documents. This was formed 6 weeks before Simone died. Yes, I said. The implication hung in the air. Cedric had been setting up embezzlement infrastructure when Simone began investigating him. The murder wasn't sudden violence. It was calculated response to discovery. Jacqueline stood, her folder open to a spreadsheet covered in color-coded annotations. Her voice was tight with professional anger. I conducted this audit at Russell's request 3 weeks ago, she said. The transactions were structured to stay below reporting thresholds. Timed to quarterly audit windows, masked as legitimate operational expenses. The pattern is unmistakable. These aren't accounting errors. This is engineered fraud. She advanced through pages, showing the board how pension contributions were reclassified as vendor payments, how the amounts were calibrated to avoid triggering automated compliance reviews, how the acceleration pattern revealed increasing desperation. The pension fund is technically solvent only because the stolen money was replaced with inflated operational costs. Jacqueline continued, which means the company has been absorbing the theft. Our margins are lower, our efficiency metrics are distorted, and our employees' retirement security was put at risk. Jacqueline, you're misreading routine cash flow management, Cedric started. I'm reading fraud, she cut him off. $1.5 million in the first 3 years. $2.3 million in the past 2. The theft was accelerating. Cedric's coffee cup sat, untouched. Cold. A ring of condensation spreading on the folder that proved his mother's murder. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a small evidence bag. Inside was the external hard drive Finn had kept safe for 5 years in his wooden boat. I set it in the center of the table. 6 weeks before her death, I said. Simone began documenting irregularities she noticed in the pension fund accounts. She created this drive with copies of emails, transaction records, phone call recordings. The final entry is dated 3 days before the yacht accident. Cedric stared at the drive like it was a live grenade. Philip connected it to the conference room system. Track 17, he said quietly. April 15, 2020. Simone's voice filled the room through the speakers. Alive and clear and damning. Cedric, I need you to explain these offshore transfers. The amounts don't match any vendor contracts I can find. And the routing goes through a company that doesn't appear in our corporate registry. I've been trying to reach you all day. Please call me back. The recording ended. The silence that followed felt like suffocation. Simone knew, I said. She was building a case, and 3 days after she confronted you about these transactions, the yacht cable was cut. That's Dad. You can't possibly think... Cedric's voice cracked. I think the evidence speaks for itself. Cedric stood abruptly, hands raised in supplication. His composure was crumbling, visibly gray pallor, trembling fingers, sweat beading at his hairline. This is a misunderstanding, he said. Yes, I created offshore structures for confidential business development. That's standard practice for acquisition targets. Competitive intelligence. Projects that require discretion before board approval. For $3.8 million in stolen pension funds. Catherine's voice was ice. They weren't stolen. They were its complex corporate finance. I can explain all of this. Dad, please, you know me. I would never, I couldn't. Watching your son drown in lies was worse than watching him drown in water. At least water was honest about what it took. Robert Brennan closed his folder and looked at Cedric with something like pity. Son, if these are legitimate business accounts, you'll have documentation. Contracts. Due diligence files. Acquisition targets. Cedric's mouth opened. Closed. His eyes darted to the door, to the windows, to the evidence spread across the table. The files are at the office. I can have them sent. Which office? William asked. This office. The office where we're sitting right now. Philip stood slowly. There's one more piece of evidence, he said quietly. The gambling debts. Philip handed Marcus Fletcher's report to the board members. But I was already watching the door, waiting for the witness who would end this. The gambling analysis spread across the table like a final indictment. Charts showing money flowing from pension funds to Cayman accounts to licensed gambling platforms in Macau, Singapore, Gibraltar. Debts totaling $4.7 million. Outstanding balance putting Cedric underwater by nearly $1 million. The offshore transfers went directly to licensed gambling platforms. Philip said, high-stakes poker, sports betting syndicates. He's been losing faster than he could steal. Catherine Hayes looked up from the report, her face pale. You killed your wife to cover gambling debts. She's not... Cedric caught himself, realizing how the denial sounded. This is you don't understand. Then help us understand. Cedric, I said quietly. He looked at me, searching for the father who'd taught him to negotiate, to find leverage, to build defenses. But that father was gone. What remained was a man who'd seen the evidence, who'd watched his daughter-in-law run for 5 years, who'd held his grandson's escape backpack. The debts weren't, it's not like credit cards, Dad. These people don't send collection notices, they send... He stopped, realizing he was confirming everything. William Morrison leaned forward. They send enforcers. People who collect debts through methods that aren't legal in any jurisdiction that matters. Cedric's silence was answer enough. I stood, walked to the conference room door. My hand found the doorknob, cool metal against my palm. The evidence is comprehensive, I said. But evidence can be disputed, explained, defended. So I brought one more witness, someone who can speak to what happened 5 years ago. My hand on the doorknob was steady, but I was thinking of Finn's backpack. Simone's 5 years running. The boat model with its hidden drive. Dad, what are you... Cedric started. I opened the door. Simone Hastings stepped through the doorway. Alive. Real. Breathing. 5 years dead. Walking into a boardroom in a blue dress. Her hair shorter than in the photos on my desk. Her face older but unmistakable. The room froze. Catherine Hayes gasped. William Morrison half stood, then sat heavily. Jacqueline's hand went to her mouth. Simone's eyes swept the room, landing on each board member, then on Cedric. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Cedric's chair scraped back violently. He stood, staring at her, and the first words out of his mouth weren't surprise at seeing a ghost. They were, "What is she doing here?" Simone. Alive. The question hung in the air like a confession. Not, "You're alive," or "How is this possible?" but "What is she doing here?" The question of someone who knew she existed, who knew she was hiding, who was shocked not by her survival but her presence. The room went absolutely silent. I let the silence build for 3 seconds. 5. 10. Then, "That's an interesting question, Cedric. What is she doing here? Someone who you claimed died 5 years ago." Cedric realized his mistake too late. His face drained of what little color remained. I thought you were dead." Simone's voice was steady, stronger than I'd heard it in weeks. "You thought I was dead because you cut the safety cable on the yacht and left me to drown. I survived. I've been in hiding for 5 years because the man who tried to murder me is sitting in this room." Catherine stood, backing away from Cedric like he was contagious. "The boat," William said slowly, looking between the forensics report and Simone. "The cable was cut. You were supposed to die, but you survived, and he thought he'd gotten away with it." Simone finished. "Until I walked through that door." Cedric's mouth opened and closed. His hands gripped the table edge. You can't, Dad! She's lying!" "She faked her own death, disappeared for 5 years, and now she shows up with some story about attempted murder," I said. "The forensic evidence of sabotage predates her appearance here by 6 weeks. Cedric!" Desmond Pierce examined that cable before any of us knew Simone was alive. "I want a lawyer," Cedric said. "Good idea," Robert Brennan replied quietly. "You'll need one." William Morrison stood, his Admiralty Council voice cutting through the room. "This meeting is adjourned. Cedric Hastings, you are immediately suspended from all positions and duties pending investigation. Philip, contact federal authorities. IT department. Revoke all system access effective immediately." "Motion to suspend Cedric Hastings," Catherine said. "All in favor?" 5 hands raised in unison. "Unanimous," Catherine confirmed. The sobs of a woman who had been dead for 5 years, finally allowed to be alive again. Cedric looked at me. One last appeal in his eyes. "Dad, please." I thought of Finn asking if his mother was in heaven. I thought of Simone living in cheap motels with fake IDs. I thought of 62 pension fund transfers, each one a theft from people who'd worked their whole lives. "You should get a lawyer, son," I said quietly. "A good one." Cedric stood there for a moment, jacket hanging crooked, tie loosened, the polished executive reduced to something hollow. Then he walked to the door, adjusted his tie with shaking hands, didn't look at Simone, didn't look at me. He left, the door closed. Simone's knees buckled. I caught her before she fell, holding her up as 5 years of running, fear, and being dead released in racking sobs against my shoulder. "It's over," I said quietly. "You're safe now. He can't hurt us anymore." Her voice was muffled against my jacket. "He can't hurt anyone anymore." The board members sat in shocked silence. Jacqueline found tissues. Catherine poured water. Professional competence reasserting itself in small acts of kindness. Philip's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his expression changed. He showed me the text from building security. Cedric Hastings just left through the loading dock. Not the main entrance. He's running. The federal agents waiting downstairs had missed him. They found Cedric 6 blocks from the office, sitting in his car in a parking garage, engine off. Nowhere left to run. Philip called at 10:23 a.m. He's in custody. Federal agents surrounded his Mercedes on the 4th level of the 4th Street garage. He didn't resist, didn't speak, just handed over his keys and phone. I was still in the boardroom with Simone, who'd finally stopped shaking enough to drink water. Did he say anything? His lawyer told him not to, but the agent said he looked relieved, like he'd been waiting for this. By noon, Cedric was arraigned on federal charges: attempted murder, pension fraud, wire fraud, obstruction of justice. Bail set at $2 million, which he couldn't make, not with his accounts frozen and his offshore money inaccessible. He'd spend the months before trial in federal detention. Justice moved like a glacier slow, grinding, inexorable, reshaping everything in its path. The next 6 weeks were depositions, forensic accountants, evidence cataloging. I gave testimony 4 times, walking federal prosecutors through every piece of evidence Philip and I had assembled. Jacqueline provided complete financial records, explaining each fraudulent transaction with the cold precision of numbers that don't lie. Desmond Pierce's marine forensics became Exhibit A. Marcus Fletcher's gambling debt analysis became Exhibit D. The federal prosecutor was a woman named Elena Vasquez, 38 years old, with the methodical intensity of someone who'd built her career on white-collar crime convictions. She met with me in August to review trial strategy. With Simone's testimony and the hard drive evidence, it's overwhelming, she said. They're expecting a plea deal. I don't want a plea, I said. I want a trial. I want it on record. Elena nodded slowly. That's your right. But it means Simone and Finn will have to testify publicly. A plea keeps them out of the courtroom. I thought of Finn, 10 years old, already carrying more than any child should. I'll talk to Simone. Let her decide. Simultaneously, family court proceedings began for Finn's custody. Simone, legally alive again, with her death certificate voided, filed for full custody. I filed for shared legal guardianship. Cedric's attorney, a different lawyer than the criminal defense team, argued for parental rights pending trial outcome. Judge Sarah Middleton had presided over Philadelphia Family Court for 19 years and had seen every variation of custody battle. But a mother returning from the dead to reclaim her son from his attempted murderer was a first. She said so from the bench on the first day of hearings. The proceedings took 3 days in early September. Anne didn't testify directly. The judge interviewed him in chambers, age-appropriate questions about where he felt safe, who he wanted to live with. But Philip presented psychological evaluations showing trauma but resilience. Documentation of the 5 years in hiding, photographs of the packed backpack. Your Honor, Philip argued on the second day, this child has spent 5 years fleeing from the man who tried to murder his mother. Parental rights don't supersede a child's right to safety. Cedric's family attorney tried to argue that criminal charges weren't convictions, that a father deserved presumption of innocence. Judge Middleton cut him off. Counselor, I've reviewed the forensic evidence. The yacht cable was deliberately cut. That's not disputed. What's disputed is who cut it. Given that the child's mother was the intended victim, and given the pending criminal charges, I'm comfortable erring on the side of the child's welfare. Simone's hand shook as she signed the custody papers. 5 years of running condensed into one signature that said, safe. September 15. Judge Middleton granted temporary full custody to Simone, with me as legal guardian and co-custodian. Cedric's parental rights were suspended pending criminal trial outcome. The decision would be revisited after the verdict. But for now, Finn was legally, formally, officially free. I bought a house in Chestnut Hill, 3 bedrooms, fenced yard, good school district, 15 minutes from Rittenhouse Square. Close enough that I could be there in minutes. Far enough that Simone could build a life that was hers, not mine. The moving day was September 20th. Finn carried his backpack into the new house, then stood in the empty bedroom, staring at bare walls. "You don't have to pack it anymore," Simone said gently. "This is home now." "What if we need to run?" Finn asked. "We're not running anymore, buddy. Your grandpa made sure of that." Finn looked at me. I nodded. "Nobody's chasing you. You're safe here." He set the backpack down slowly, like releasing a weight he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it wasn't part of his body. Late September. I sat in the Chestnut Hill house watching Finn unpack for real. Baseball posters went up on walls. Books filled a shelf. Clothes went into a dresser instead of a backpack. Simone was downstairs unpacking kitchen boxes, humming something I didn't recognize. The company was saved. Simone was alive. Finn was safe. Justice would be served when the trial concluded next spring. But my son was in a federal detention cell awaiting prosecution. My family was shattered. The business I'd spent 40 years building would always carry the stain of what Cedric had done. Every news article, every industry mention, every shareholder report would reference the embezzlement, the murder attempt, the son who'd stolen from his own employees. Victory tasted like ashes mixed with relief. "Grandpa," Finn said, pulling me from my thoughts. "Can I paint the walls Mom says I can pick the color?" "Any color you want, buddy. This is your room. Your home." He considered seriously. I picked blue, like the boat Mom made me. The backpack sat empty in Finn's closet now, a relic of a childhood stolen and partially reclaimed. The wooden boat sat on Finn's dresser, the hidden compartment empty now that the hard drive was federal evidence. But the craftsmanship remained dovetailed joints, hand-carved details, tiny brass anchor, a mother's love built into something that could carry secrets and survive storms. "Blue sounds perfect," I said. That night, Philip called. "Cedric's attorney reached out. He wants to make a statement, not for the plea negotiation, but something else. He wants to see you." "Why?" "One last conversation, father to son, before the trial destroys what's left. The attorney says Cedric has things he needs to say that aren't for the lawyers." The phone call came on a Saturday morning. Simone's voice careful. "Finn asked if you could visit today. He wants to ask you something." I hadn't decided yet whether to see Cedric. Philip was waiting for my answer. The federal detention facility requiring 48 hours notice for visits. But that decision could wait. Finn couldn't. I arrived at the Chestnut Hill house mid-morning. Anne was waiting on the front porch. Nervous energy in his posture, shifting weight, picking at a loose thread on his shorts. Simone had made lemonade, condensation beating on the pitcher. "Hey, buddy," I said, settling into the porch chair beside him. "Hey, Grandpa." He poured lemonade with exaggerated concentration, like the task required architectural precision. Simone gave me a look that said, "Be patient," and retreated inside. Finn drank half his glass, set it down, picked it up again, started a sentence twice and stopped. I waited. The morning was warm, but not hot. Late August, beginning its slow surrender to fall. Finally. "Grandpa, could you teach me about what you do? The resorts and marinas and stuff?" I set down my own glass carefully. "I'd be honored. What do you want to know?" I thought maybe, if you're not too busy, you could show me how it works. He looked at me directly then, and I saw something I hadn't seen in his face before. Not fear or wariness, but curiosity, interest, everything. How you build things that last. The same words I'd used with Cedric 25 years ago. The same value I'd tried to teach. Hearing them from Finn felt like being offered a second chance I hadn't known I wanted. "I've got blueprints in the car," I said. "Let's start there." We moved inside to the dining table. I retrieved the marina renovation plans from my trunk. Simple drawings for a Cape May dock expansion. Nothing classified. Good for teaching basics. As I spread them across the table, I glanced toward the front door. The backpack by the door, partially unzipped, no longer bulging. A turtle shell slowly being shed. The backpack was still there, but different. Unzipped, smaller, less bulging than before. Simone caught my look. "He took out the extra clothes last week," she said quietly. "And the granola bars yesterday." "That's good," I asked. "That's very good." Finn was already leaning over the blueprints, tracing lines with his finger. I pulled a chair beside him and began. "These are elevation drawings," I explained. "They show the structure from different angles. This is how we see what the building, or in this case, the dock, will look like from the side, from above, from the water." "Why do the pilings go so deep?" Finn pointed to the foundation specs. "Because the worst storm hasn't happened yet. You always build for the storm you haven't seen." He nodded thoughtfully. "Did you teach my dad this stuff?" The question came without accusation, just simple curiosity. I chose my words carefully. "I did. But he was in a hurry. You're taking your time. That's better." My hand shook slightly as I showed Finn the marina plans, the same drawings I once showed Cedric. Now offered to a boy who might actually build something good. We spent an hour on load-bearing structures. Dock configurations for storm surge, material choices for saltwater exposure. Finn asked sharp questions. Why this angle? Why these materials? How do you know it won't collapse? I realized the boy had his grandfather's eye for detail, his mother's careful logic. None of his father's desperate shortcuts. "Your turn," I said, pulling out blank paper and a pencil. "Design your own dock. Doesn't have to be perfect, just show me what you're thinking." Finn picked up the pencil, hesitated, then began drawing. His tongue poked between his teeth in concentration. The same expression I'd seen in photos of myself at his age. He drew carefully, erasing twice, adding details. His dock had a fishing platform with railings, a designated area for kayaks, steps down to the water instead of a ladder, easier access, safer for kids. I looked at the drawing and saw it clearly. A boy who'd been running for 5 years. "I made it so kids could fish without falling in," Finn explained. "And the kayak spot has tie-downs so they don't drift away. Safety first. That's smart design. Could we build this like for real someday?" "Someday. Yeah. When you're ready." He smiled. And it reached his eyes, something I hadn't seen often enough. Simone made sandwiches for lunch. We ate on the porch, talking about nothing important. Baseball standings. Whether 10 was old enough to learn woodworking. The color Finn had chosen for his bedroom walls. Normal conversation. Family lunch on a Saturday. After we finished, Finn went to get something from his room. I heard a drawer open. Then he returned with his tablet, the one that used to live in the backpack for emergency contact numbers and offline maps. "I put this in my desk drawer," Finn said casually. "It's easier to charge there." Simone's eyes filled with tears. She's tending to clear dishes. I understood. The tablet in the backpack was for running. The tablet in the desk drawer was for homework and games. The boy was unpacking his survival kit because he was starting to believe in permanence. Unpacking wasn't just about removing items from a bag, it was about removing fear from a child's heart. One granola bar at a time. "Next time, could you show me how to read the blueprints for the Cape May resort?" Finn asked. "The whole thing, not just the dock." "Next time. And the time after that. As many times as you want." "We have next times now," Finn said quietly. I pulled him into a hug. He let me, relaxing into it instead of holding himself rigid the way he had in July. That evening, driving home, my phone buzzed, a text from Simone with a photo attached. The backpack, open on Finn's bed. Inside, only the wooden boat model Simone had made him 5 years ago. No clothes, no food, no emergency cash. Just the treasure that had saved them all. The caption read, "He says he's keeping it because it's special, not because we might run." 4 months after the boardroom. I stood in front of the Harborview restaurant on Penn's Landing and realized some endings are actually beginnings. The photo Simone had sent Finn's backpack, containing only the wooden boat, sat in my phone's favorites folder. I'd looked at it a dozen times over the past week, each time feeling something loosen in my chest. The boy was unpacking his fear, piece by piece, choosing permanence. Today was Saturday, late September. I'd brought Simone, Finn and Ivy Harper, Anne's classmate from his new school in Chestnut Hill. A chatty 10-year-old who treated Finn like any other kid and thought marina architecture was actually pretty good. Cool. We'd come to this restaurant deliberately. The hostess offered us any table. "The corner booth by the window, please," I said. Finn looked at me sharply. "You sure about this table? Grandpa..." He remembered. Of course he remembered. 4 months ago he'd sat here, hungry and afraid, looking to Simone for every signal. "I'm sure. This is where it started. Seems right to come back." "What started?" Ivy asked, sliding into the booth. Finn and I exchanged a glance. "Long story," he said. "I'll tell you later." The harbor spread before us through the window. Same view, same boats rocking gently at their moorings. Everything different. Linda, the weekend server, approached with coffee and recognition lighting her face. She'd served us that first morning. Seen the quiet boy who barely spoke, who'd eaten like someone expecting the meal to be his last. "Good to see you back, Mr. Hastings," she said warmly. "And you brought the whole family this time." "This is Ivy," Finn said easily, no hesitation. "She's in my class. We're doing a project on marina architecture." "Finn's teaching me about load-bearing structures," Ivy added. "It's actually pretty cool." Linda caught my eye and smiled. She saw it too. The transformation. The boy who'd disappeared into silence was introducing friends and making eye contact. The same harbor view through the same window. But this time Finn looked out at it and saw possibility instead of escape routes. "What can I get you folks?" Linda pulled out her order pad. Menus opened. 4 months ago. Finn had studied his with the concentration of someone solving a puzzle, looking to Simone for every cue. Choice the cheapest item like someone who'd learned hunger young. Today he scanned the menu himself, leaned over to see what Ivy was considering. Then declared, "I'll have the blueberry pancakes. And bacon, extra crispy." No hesitation. No checking for permission. Just a kid ordering breakfast. "Extra crispy bacon," I said. "Good choice, buddy. Mom makes it that way at home now." Finn turned to Ivy. "We have a house in Chestnut Hill. It's got a yard and everything." Simone's hand found mine under the table. Squeezed once. Her eyes were bright. "He unpacked his emergency backpack last month," she said quietly. "Just to me. Completely." I knew. But hearing it still mattered. Extra crispy bacon. Such a small thing. Such a normal thing. Such an impossible thing 4 months ago, while we waited for food. Finn and Ivy debated whether suspension bridges were cooler than cantilever designs. Guy argued for suspension more dramatic, while Finn defended cantilever engineering better weight distribution. Normal kid conversation. No fear. No watchfulness. I watched Simone relax into the booth, no longer scanning exits or monitoring the door. She laughed at something Ivy said, and the sound was unguarded, genuine. I thought about foundations. 40 years I'd spent building resorts and marinas, teaching Cedric that structures need solid bases, that shortcuts lead to collapse, that you build for storms you haven't seen yet. All those lessons about load-bearing walls and deep pilings and materials that weather salt and time. But I'd never taught him the most important foundation truth. Not blind loyalty, but truth. The structure I was building now with Finn. With Simone, it was built on truth, not fear, on choosing to see what was real instead of what I wanted to believe. Loyalty without truth isn't love. It's fear. And fear builds nothing that lasts. "You okay?" Russell Simone asked. "I'm good. Just thinking about what we've built here. Not a resort," she said softly. "A family." Pancakes arrived, steam rising. Syrup pooled golden on the plates. Finn and Ivy dug in, still arguing good-naturedly about bridge engineering. Simone's phone buzzed Philip's name on the screen, probably confirming something about Cedric's trial date, and she silenced it without stress. Later, not now. I cut into my own pancakes. The smell of butter and maple sweet in the air. Linda refilled coffee cups. Through the window, morning light caught the harbor waves, turning them silver. Hunger came in many forms. For food, for safety, for truth. The greatest hunger was always for home. The story had begun with a hungry child at this table. It ended with that hunger finally satisfied. Not just with food, but with safety, truth, family, foundations rebuilt. This time on bedrock that wouldn't shift. "Grandpa," Finn said, syrup on his chin, completely unself-conscious. "Next weekend, can we go to the marina? I want to show Ivy the dock design we worked on." "Absolutely. We'll make a day of it." "Can we bring Mom?" "Of course." "Cool." Finn turned back to his pancakes, already explaining to Ivy about storm pilings and why depth mattered. I watched him, animated, engaged, anchored. Things built on truth last longer than things built on fear. I'd learned that lesson the hard way. Paid for it with a son in federal detention and a family nearly destroyed. But I'd learned it. And I was building something now that would weather the storms. We finished breakfast slowly. No rush. Paid the check. Linda wished us a good weekend and told Finn to come back soon. He promised he would. As we left the restaurant, Finn ran ahead with Ivy, laughing about something only 10-year-olds find hilarious. Simone linked her arm through mine. "Thank you for noticing," she said quietly. "That first day. Thank you for seeing him." I watched my grandson, no longer hungry, no longer afraid, no longer running. Just a boy with a friend and a home and a future. "I'm just glad I finally learned what's worth building," I said. The harbor spread before us, full of boats that weathered storms because they were anchored to something solid. Truth. Family. Home. And to you listening to my story, remember this truth. May cost you everything you thought you knew, but it's the only foundation that holds. Looking back, I see where I failed. I built a company on solid foundations but never taught my son that trust without truth is just fear with a different name. I focused on teaching him how to build structures, not character. Don't make my mistake. Loyalty that protects lies isn't loyalty. It's cowardice dressed as love. This wasn't a revenge story, though it might sound like one. Revenge would have been destroying Cedric quietly, protecting the family name, keeping everything hidden. This was about justice, about protecting the innocent and refusing to let fear dictate my choices. I believe God revealed the truth when he did for a reason. Simone survived 5 years in hiding because she was meant to come home. Finn was meant to stop running, and I was meant to finally learn what's worth building a family founded on truth, not secrets. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Some might call this a revenge story, but it's really about choosing justice over silence. Have you ever had to make a choice like this? What would you have done? If someone you know needs to hear this, please share it. And if you'd like more stories about standing up for what's right, consider subscribing. It means the world. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time and attention matter more than you know. One final note. While this story contains fictionalized elements for privacy and storytelling, the core message remains true. Sometimes the hardest thing we do is choose truth over comfort.